I would like to provide some feedback on the design decisions and philosophies that I see popping up in the priest talent trees. And first of all, I think I should say that while I was designing my ideal paladin talent trees, there were some rules that I was following. Rule 0 is that the fun factor is the top priority, and the cool factor is the second priority. Other design goals should take a back seat to either or both of these. Rule number 1, never put something players want behind something players don't want. Rule number 2, never put something that would be a must-have for another spec at the base of a particular spec's column in the class tree. Rule 3, things at the base of a spec's column in the class tree should be at least situationally appealing for other specs, while still being the kind of thing you'd expect to get for free for picking the spec. Rule number 4, the deepest talents in any tree need to be the kinds of things that you want to reach for. Powerful damage and healing abilities, cooldowns, game-changing passes, that kind of thing. Rule number 5, have a rhyme and reason behind why you put things where you put them. Maybe one section for multi-target, one for single target, maybe one section for melee, one for casting, etc. Rule number 6, giving players lots of options, lots of different paths they can take, is a good thing, as it creates player agency and player freedom, and that, in turn, unlocks the fun. And some of the things Blizzard did with their trees, at least in their first drafts, didn't seem to follow these rules, at least not exactly. I think a great place to begin would be the Holy Tree for Priests. And when we first start out, it kind of looks like there's 3 different paths opening up for Holy Priests. To the left, there's group healing with Prayer of Healing and Holy Word Sanctify. Down the middle, it looks like there's single target healing with Holy Word Serenity, and over on the right, it looks like there's damage dealing with Holy Fire and Holy Word Chastise. Now, I'm all for putting damage abilities and damage talents in healing trees. I wouldn't be advocating for Denounce to get unpruned if I wasn't in favor of healers doing some damage. But there are a couple of mistakes I see that Blizzard made. Most of the talents on the right-hand side are consistently about damage, with a couple of exceptions. Guardian Spirit is hidden behind Holy Word Chastise, which itself has Holy Fire as a prerequisite. Holy Priests who want to be pure healing and don't care about damage will want Guardian Spirit, but they won't want Holy Fire or Holy Word Chastise. But they have to get the things that they don't want in order to get the things they do want. True as it may be that the 8-point threshold practically forces players to grab damage talents before they can progress past that line, that's not actually a rebuttal of my argument at all. That's just 2 different ways that the talent system forces players to spend talent points to get what they don't want, just so they can obtain the things they do want. Creating 2 ways that it's necessary doesn't make the one way that I was talking about any less annoying. Though if I were a Blizzard developer who was emotionally invested in the idea that these trees are awesome, I might trick myself into incorrectly believing that it does. But really, 2 wrongs don't make right. Regardless of what aspects of the talent system are currently forcing players to spend on things they don't want in order to get the things they do want, the developers can build the trees so that players never need to spend on things they don't want to get the things they do want. And the devs should design the trees that way. And Symbol of Hope is in pretty much the same predicament. Ultimately, it has the same prerequisites Guardian Spirit has. In fact, there's no way to get Symbol of Hope if you haven't already gotten Guardian Spirit. Symbol of Hope is a pretty good cooldown, but it's not really about damage at all, even though it's nestled right in the damage talents, making it feel very out of place. And there are other places where the theme of a given path doesn't feel consistent, like Spirit of Redemption being a far left talent in the middle of the group healing path. It helps with single target healing just as much as it does with group healing, so it should probably be between those 2 paths. And the center path isn't really about single target healing for more than the first step or so. If it were up to me, here's how I would have organized it. I'd have put Guardian Spirit in the single target path right in the middle. I'd have made Spirit of Redemption a talent in between the single target and multi-target paths that could function as a crossover bridge, letting someone start on the single target healing path and jump to the multi-target one, or start on the multi-target healing path and jump to the single target one. I might also unprune Light of Touré, the Legion artifact weapon ability, to add another single target healing option for the single target path. Maybe Divine Star and Halo would be in the Guardian Spirit's place in the damage side, since those two abilities deal damage. Symbol of Hope might be a crossover between the single target path and the damage path, since Symbol of Hope is really about recovering resources and isn't about either healing or damage dealing. Of course, all these additions and moves that I'm talking about have to do with a design philosophy that I have, which is that there should be paths that have specific consistent purposes, and that let players easily optimize for those purposes. Would that make players overpowered in their roles? I sure hope not, but if everyone is overpowered, then no one is overpowered in a way, and it would feel good to be that powerful, and how the game feels to players is what determines if they've had a good experience or not. So maybe this is a wise design philosophy to have. With those complaints out of the way, there are a few things I'd like to say that look really promising. First of all, Blizzard hadn't added any new abilities to the game in the Death Knight or Druid talents, and that was very disappointing. New abilities are exciting to us players, so if the Blizzard developers want us to get excited about Dragonflight, there really should be some cool new buttons for us to press. When the priest trees came out, I saw things like Holy Word Life and Imperial Blaze, and those gave me hope. Hope that new buttons to press will be coming. Ideally, every player would have the ability to grab 2 or 3 new spells, but the bandwidth for that kind of work might not be available at Blizzard. I understand that, but I sure hope Blizzard adds whatever spells they can get away with adding. The more they add, the more exciting Dragonflight is going to be. Now let's have a look at Discipline. We have our first sign that this was a rush job. Purify is a spec talent for Discipline and not for Holy, and there's even a footnote saying that it'll be baselined later. Again, if the purpose of these rushed talent trees is to get feedback from players as soon as possible so that the developers can actually pivot, then this is a good thing. If the reasons for rushing are just about anything else, then it's a bad thing. Now, I couldn't really expect Discipline to have a single target damage path and a multi-target damage path, since multi-target damage would provide too much atonement healing. But there is rhyme and reason to the placement of the talents. Shadow talents are over on the right and Holy Ones are over on the left, which makes me think that if Blizzard starts taking my ideas for the Holy Paladin talents that I came up with in my ideal trees, they're probably going to put the melee talents on the right and the casting talents on the left, when I did the opposite. I'm fine with that. I chose those directions arbitrarily, and either is as good as the other as long as they stick with the theme. And for the most part, they do stick with the themes in Discipline. There are a few things I think need some tweaking, but overall, I don't see that many problems, and the design looks fairly solid apart from those minor things. There are a couple of talents whose placement doesn't quite make sense, like how Swift Penitence is way over on the right and doesn't even have Penance as a prerequisite. There's space below Penance, the talent should probably go there. And Stolen Psyche would fit further right. It's surprising that Shining Force and Psychic Voice are mutually exclusive and occupy the same space in Holy's tree, but are different and in different places in the Discipline tree, and not mutually exclusive. Then there's Evenfall. That allows a Holy spell, Power Word Radiance, to grant Power of the Dark Side, even though it doesn't actually have Power of the Dark Side as a prerequisite, which makes me wonder what would happen if a player got Evenfall and didn't get Power of the Dark Side. I mean, if that would actually work insofar as a player who did that would actually get the Power of the Dark Side buff, then probably this wouldn't be a problem. But it's sure got me scratching my head at this point. Apart from things like that, Discipline seems pretty solid overall. Unlike the Holy Tree, most of what I see follows the rules. It doesn't seem to put things players want behind things that they don't want. The deeper you go, the more powerful and appealing the talents get, and I especially like how they're bringing back the Legion Artifact weapon ability. I did about the same thing in my Holy Paladin talents, again making me think that I was more or less on the right track. Looking at Shadow, well, shoot, I'm trying to find rhyme and reason, maybe in terms of single target versus multi-target, but I'm not finding it, at least not as far as partitioning up the whole tree is concerned. Shadow Crash and Psychic Link are over on the left, Mind Seer's over on the right, with Searing Nightmare in the middle. If Blizzard wanted rhyme or reason based on single target versus multi-target, then they probably would have put talents like those in a nice little path and give the player a one-stop shop for all things multi-target. And probably Searing Nightmare wouldn't be mutually exclusive with Misery for that matter. Maybe it's okay that there's no rhyme or reason as far as that goes. There are still ways a Shadow Priest can spec themselves out to specialize in multi-target damage if they feel like it, so probably I shouldn't complain. It kind of seems like Shadow's got multiple mini-paths that have themes to them. A lot of Vampiric Embrace downline talents buff Vampiric Embrace. Silence has a lot of defensive down its lines. The middle is about buffing Void Form. The right-hand side after Vampiric Insight seems to buff single target, while the left-hand side has some multi-target buffs. There is some rhyme and reason, but it's more localized than the rhyme and reason in the Discipline tree. And I think that's okay as long as players can have fun and build as they please, and it sure seems like they can. Though it feels a little bit weird that the devs specifically built the tree so that players can't not get Vampiric Insight. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Does it betray a sense of insecurity about whether players would choose to pick up their nifty new spec-defining passive that they prevent players from choosing not to take it? Or is the fact that the lion's share of talents are under this awesome new talent ability actually a good thing? I don't know, but I sure hope it's the latter. I also feel like it would be a bit cooler if there were a multi-target version of Mind Blast somewhere in here, but I'm not a Shadow player, so what do I know? Before I stop talking about the pre-spec trees, I'd like to add that the non-prerequisite talents deep in each spec tree, which are Power Word Barrier for Discipline, Holy Word Salvation or Apotheosis for Holy, and Insidious Ire for Shadow. These are great ideas. These no prerequisite talents provide a lot of player freedom, and I hope, oh so much, that they are going to be the norm in talent tree design by the time Dragonflight releases. Anyhow, let's look at the class talent tree at this point. You know, once upon a time, being in shadow form meant you couldn't cast any holy spells. But the more I research, the less it seems like that's still true. If you really felt like it, you could probably cast Smite in shadow form, or Power Word Shield for that matter. There's talents encouraging you to do so. And if you felt like doing some off-healing apart from Vampiric Embrace, I suspect that Prayer of Mending would be your first choice about how you do it. It spreads healing around the raid or party based on damage taken, and spending 2 points instead of 1 lets you do more direct single-target healing. So yes, Prayer of Mending looks like it's a good choice for the Holy/Discipline root talent. And it's definitely not a must-have, so that's an even bigger win. Actually, one thing that I notice off the bat, there's kind of a Holy section on the far left, a Discipline section in the middle, and a Shadow section on the right. But there are 2 root talents and 4 deep columns instead of 3 and 3 like there is in, for example, the Death Knight or Rogue trees. That's neither a bad thing nor a good thing in and of itself, but it is unique. So far, at least. And it does make perfect sense why they built it this way, since Discipline is halfway between Holy and Shadow. Holy gets Prayer of Mending automatically, Shadow gets Shadow Word Death automatically, and Discipline gets both of those automatically. It works. I also like the low-hanging fruit in the tree. It's easy to grab a Dispel, Shadow Mend, and even a nice beefy cooldown with Power Infusion. I also like how Shadow Word Death is the basic Shadow talent. Remember the rules that I had about the root class talents? The shallowest talents in the class tree cannot be must-haves for the specs that they aren't roots for, but they should be appealing and interesting and useful in at least some cases for the other specs, and one legitimate use case is where a tank or a healer is soloing. Shadow Word Death is great for a soloing healer as it's an execute, which also hints that I did the right thing when I made Hammer of Wrath the Root of Retribution's column in my own ideal Paladin talents, which is a nice bonus. I keep referring back to those ideal Holy Paladin talents because those inform the design philosophies that I like and that I figure are going to make her a good gaming experience. But anyway, the talents between the 8 and 20 point thresholds seem to make sense in terms of their placement and power as well. I find it a little bit strange that the far right talents are all about Shadow Fiend. I would have expected Mind Blast and Shadow Word Pain to get a little more love down there. I mean, I'd use Mind Blast as a soloing healing priest if I played one. That being said, talents buffing those would probably be de facto must-haves for Shadow Spect priests, so maybe that's why Blizzard didn't add them? Of course, I'd find that a little bit odd since other classes have must-have talents deep in the columns of their respective specs. I wouldn't expect a Restoration Druid to lack Wild Growth or a Subtlety Rogue not to have Shadow Dance. Anyhow, on the other side of the class tree, I think Holy Word Life is a great idea, but I'm a little surprised it isn't in the Holy Tree. It sounds, in terms of its name and its effect, like it would be right up Holy's alley. And it could help make a coherent single-target healing path in Holy's Spec Tree, since Holy has only a few active single-target healing abilities that could form such a path. That's not to say that it doesn't look good and make sense where it is, of course. I think there should be a powerful heal deep in Holy's area of the class talents, and this certainly fits the bill. Though I'm scratching my head about how useful Discipline would find it. It doesn't have anything to do with Atonement, after all. Of course, I added some oh-snap healing buttons that had nothing to do with Atonement in my Discipline concepts for Project Decade, so I guess I'm a fine one to talk about that. One thing I think would make for a better tree is a few more crossovers between paths, so you can start in one column and jump to another. In a lot of ways, you're locked into a particular path immediately after the 8-point threshold, and I feel like more freedom would be better. Most of what I see in the priest talents in general I like, though there's definitely room for improvement in a few places. We'll have to see how quickly Blizzard gets Purify out of the Discipline tree, and whether they take any feedback into account when they do, or whether they communicate about what they do, or choose not to do that we would like them to do in the cases where they don't do it. Anyhow, I think that this is more than enough of me yapping for a single video. I should make another one for rogues and another one for hunters. Heck, another one for Death Knights and Druids is probably smart, and while I don't expect to keep pace with the rate Blizzard is releasing this info, that's a good problem to have, really.